The viewpoints expressed on Night Fright are not necessarily those of the host, the staff, the sponsors, or the affiliate stations. Tonight's program may contain graphic themes or images. Viewer discretion is advised.
There is a time for question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for harmony and conspiracy. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Showtime! Welcome to the show. I'm Brent Holland, and welcome one and all to Night Fright. Get the coffee going, get the tea going, get a beverage of your choice going. Jim Marrs is here tonight. Jim Marrs is quite simply, folks, the chairman of the board of conspiracy authors. Hollywood director Oliver Stone used Jim's groundbreaking book, Crossfire, the plot that killed Kennedy, to base his feature film JFK on. Alien Agenda, another one of Jim's books, remains one of the biggest-selling UFO books of all time. Jim's authored The Terror Conspiracy, Rule by Secrecy, Rise of the Fourth Reich, The $1 Trillion Conspiracy, and many other books that you can get at www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book covers, and that'll take you to a spot to get them. But tonight, my friends, we're going to go headfirst into his new book, Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us. I'd like to welcome Jim Marrs back to the show, all the way live from Texas. How you doing, Jim?
Howdy, Brent. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's good to have you back on the show, my friend. Okay, this is a terrifying title. How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us, Population Control.
It should be, Brent.
I guess
should be. Because this whole thing, when I say the whole thing, I'm talking about our whole society, politics, medicine, academic, etc., everything. This has gone beyond politics or philosophical discussion. We're into self-defense because once you read my book, Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us, and you read about what they're putting in our food, what they're putting in our water, what they're putting in the air, what they're putting in the vaccines, and the other things they're doing, such as fracking, ruining the water tables. It's absolutely incredible, and most people see this as individual issues. There are a lot of people that are concerned about fluoride in the water. There's a lot of people concerned about the dangers of vaccines and the additives that go into the vaccine. And, but rarely have they put it all together and realized that this is a conscious plan being worked at the highest levels of ownership of the corporations, which are now pretty much dominating the planet. And what I'm talking about is these people come from families of eugenicists. They're into eugenics, which is let's improve the human race. And they really truly believe that the ultimate problem in the whole world today is that overpopulation. There's just too many people. And I guess if you live in a big city and you get stuck in traffic all the time and worry about crime and congestion and pollution, that it's pretty easy to buy into that. But let me point out that at the current average living space in Hong Kong, for example, which is very, very highly populated, is 1,700 square feet. That's pretty good sized house, pretty good sized home, and really big sized apartment or condominium. So based on 1,700 square feet, the entire population of the world, 7.5 billion of us, could live comfortably enough in the state of Texas. And if you wanted to really spread out, then we could all live and probably have an acre apiece in Australia. So there really isn't truly a population problem. There's a population concentration problem. And I think all of that could be taken care of by technology.
I'm going to just tell folks who we're speaking with. Folks, you're just joining us, Jim Marrs. That's all I need to say. His book is called Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us. And we're going to jump in right away. Let's talk about National Security Memo 200, or NSM 200. This is chilling when I read this in your book. Could you tell us a little bit about that, Jim?
Yeah, well, this was Henry Kissinger who helped put that together, and basically what he's saying is again, based on the whole idea that there's just too many people, is that we need to have, as official policy in the United States, means of reducing the population, particularly in the third world. Okay, now he knows exactly what he's talking about, and in fact, I think that was explained by himself when he stated that depopulation should be the highest priority of U.S. foreign policy towards the third world. And this was even further clarified by others. For example, General Maxwell Taylor, who was ambassador in charge of the war in Vietnam for a time, and at one time was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he said that it's necessary in the new century. He wrote this in the 70s, so he's talking about right now. He said it's in the new century, it's going to be necessary to reduce the world's population, mostly in third world countries, using methods such as disease, starvation, and regional wars. Now, I ask you, isn't that what we see particularly in Africa and in some of the other third world countries? We see disease, we see starvation, and we see limited warfare. All right? So, folks, this is not, he wasn't saying this, maybe we'll see this. He's saying we need to do this, okay? In fact, I think the ultimate expression of this eugenics movement of let's reduce the population, let's, clean out the gene pool of the human race can be found with the Nazis in Germany during World War II, because they bought into this eugenics movement, which actually began in the United States. In fact, by the mid-1930s, most of the states here in the United States had sterilization laws. If you didn't come up to their standards as to skin color and bone structure and IQ, then you could be involuntarily sterilized. And, of course, the Nazis in Germany got hold of this and said, this is a great idea. We got some people here we're not fond of. And so, but they took it to its logical extreme. Well, we'll just kill them. And that led to the concentration camps and the Holocaust. And so eugenics kind of got a bad name, but it's still here, okay? One of the outgrowths of the eugenics program is Planned Parenthood, which recently got some bad press because it turns out that they're scavenging and selling the body parts from baby fetuses. So, it's still here. And these at the very top of the food chain, they're the ones who buy into this, and they are seeing to it that the population, not only in the third world, but now in the first world, in our world, is trimmed by putting substances in the water, in the food, in the vaccines, in the air. I don't know, Brent, if how often or how much you've talked about chemtrails, but just look at what they're spraying in the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Every day there's something new in the air. Let's talk about something that is in the book as well, something you called God. Now, not to be mistaken, folks, it stands for guns, oil...
For the deity, yeah.
And drugs. May we all bow
right.
and our presence and get on our knees. This was frightening as well, my friend. Can we talk about guns, oil, and drugs?
Sure. That's I call it the God Syndicate, okay? It's not the deity. It's guns, oil, drugs. The three most profitable commodities in the world today, and they're all controlled by pretty much the same banks, the same corporations, and the same ownership that have cross-ownership with so many of these multinational corporations. And we'll start with guns. What I think is the most ironic thing going is this issue of guns, because according to congressional reports over the past couple of decades, it's been the United States of America that is the leading arms merchant of the world. Okay, and this is not even talking about government to government sales. This is just private American companies selling to people, groups, organizations, nations all around the world, particularly in a program called commercial sales. And what's the irony of this is that while we are providing 78% of the weapons used in the world, compared to Russia's 5% and China's 3%. So in other words, the United States is providing more than twice the weapons around the world than either Russia or China combined. And so while we're doing that at home, as everyone is well aware, they've been taking extreme steps trying to take guns away from everybody. So isn't that ironical that at a very time when they don't want American citizens to have guns, including Marines, I guess you saw with the military said, no, we don't want to arm the Marines at their recruiting stations, even though if there's anybody in the whole world that ought to be trusted with a weapon, it should be a United States Marine. And they're not going to do that. They're going to take weapons away from them, too. But yet, around the world, to ISIS and to Al-Qaeda and to the Taliban, to anybody who wants to buy them, we'll sell weapons all around the world. Now, I just find that very ironic.
I find it absolutely absurd. Now, there was a little piece in your book about Benghazi, and that rang home for me because I just had a fellow by the name of Chris Paronto on the show, who's written a book called 13 Hours in Benghazi. And there's a feature film about his life about to be released in January, folks, by Michael Bay. He's directed it. And Chris was there in the firefights that night. And he was told to stand down. State says there was no stand down order given. Chris says, oh, yes, there was. But what is more unnerving is Susan Rice came out and said it was just a mob riot because of caused by a movie that was out at the time in the United States that depicted Islam in a negative fashion. That wasn't true. This mob riot, folks, had weapons, and what is unnerving is chances are better than good that they got these weapons, guess where from? I'll leave that answer to Jim.
The direct commercial sales.
There you go.
That was us.
Yep.
Okay, and I think Ambassador Stevens got wind of that, and I think he was either trying to renegotiate the deal or put a stop to that. And so actually, when you really get down to it, I think Benghazi was an organized hit to prevent them from blowing the whistle on this under-the-table arms deal. And this is nothing new. You know, have we all forgotten Fast and Furious, where the Justice Department coerced gun dealers in the Southwest to sell guns to the Mexican drug lords, ostensibly so they could trace them. But think about that for a minute. Wait a minute. You see, you sell a gun to a gun lord, and he goes back into Mexico. How are you going to track it? You know, the whole thing's absurd. No, what it was they wanted to promote more shootings and more violence along the border so they could push their anti-gun agenda. Oh, we got to take away all the guns, you know. Again, and in the case of Benghazi, we were selling the bad guys heavy ordnance, and they were going to blow the whistle on that, so they had to take out Ambassador Stevens and those Marines, and this just goes on and on. On September the 13th of 2013, President Obama publicly announced that he was ignoring the law, U.S. law, that states you cannot sell weapons to a known terrorist group, because he wanted to arm the Syrian rebels so that they could overthrow their government of Assad. And, of course, the Syrian rebels then turned into ISIS and the scourge of the Middle East, and they were, you know, now we're having to fight them, and they got our weapons because we sold it to them, just like we did sell weapons to Saddam Hussein. And then when we invaded his country, we broke up his army, but we let them go home with their weapons so that they could then turn around and fight insurgency war. So in other words, what I'm telling you is we're creating our own enemies. How insane is that?
It is. It's crazy. It's just craziness, and it goes on and on and on. And something in the book that you talk about, Jim, is something called a perpetual war or war forever.
Yeah.
And it seems to be.
Well, see,
go ahead, please.
Warfare, okay, or better yet, that's the old term. Now they call it national defense, okay. So, we want to defend the country, so we go all around the world and bomb people, strafe people, because we want peace. And if they don't want peace, by golly, we'll just bomb the hell out of them. And so in defense. But if you think about it, the national defense is the one and only legitimate reason for government, all right, to provide for the common defense. And in fact, that's in the Constitution. It clearly states that the federal government should only have, I think, about 3 powers. And one is to coin and regulate money and regulate tariffs and commerce. And 3, provide for the common defense. Okay, so if we suddenly don't have any enemies, like we had there momentarily when communism collapsed, it's like, wow, now we have a peaceful world. No, we can't, because then there's no legitimate reason to have a superior government, okay, a centralized power. And so we had to manufacture enemies, and we did. And we're still gripping with them, and this is why I guess it was Dick Cheney who said that, yes, this war against terrorism is an endless war. There's not going to be any end to it. Always got to be at war. Because when you're at war, then the government has a rationale to tell everybody what to do, how to live, and put restrictions on their freedom and liberty.
Let's go into oil now, Jim. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but Canada supplies the most oil to the United States. It also has the second largest oil reserves next to Saudi Arabia in the world. And yet we still see this OPEC raising its head all the time, and everybody kowtowing to OPEC. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. And by the way, folks, Canada is not a member of OPEC, by the way.
Well, Brent, maybe this will make sense to you. OPEC is the oil producing countries over in the Middle East, and they are like the Texas landowner, okay, where the wells are. They don't process the oil, they don't store the oil, they don't ship the petroleum, they don't make the gasoline, they don't sell the gasoline. They are the leaseholders for these oil-rich fields over in the Middle East, and so they get rich, off of the money that the oil companies pay to them for this oil. So this whole thing about OPEC and, we're at the mercy of OPEC, and OPEC raised prices today, that's all just camouflage. It's the oil companies. They decide what the price is. They decide what it's worth. And they have ridden for far too long on the idea of peak oil, okay? Now, this comes back to a guy named Marion King Hubert, who was a academic, and back in the 50s, he came out and said, there's only so much oil in the ground, and by the year 2000, we're going to hit its peak. And after that, there'll be less and less and less until there's just no more. And it turns out that he was totally wrong. Peak oil proved false because oil production set new records as late as 2011, 2012. And in fact, if somebody wants to try to tell you that we're running out of oil, you just give them 3 words: Bakken Rock Formation. Okay, it's Bakken, Bakken Rock Formation. Look that up. It's a huge underground reservoir of raw petroleum under North Dakota, Montana, and Canada. And the experts say that even at increased rates of consumption, there's enough untapped petroleum in the Bakken Rock Formation to last us for the next 2 1,000 years, okay? So there is no shortage of gasoline. But the problem is, and I'm first to say this, is we do not need to continue to base our whole economy on petroleum, because we are choking ourselves to death with gasoline fumes and air pollution and water pollution and oil spills like in the Gulf of Mexico, where, by the way, they're still spraying Corexit to push all this oil down to the bottom of the Gulf. And in fact, the fishermen down along the Gulf will probably tell you the same thing I will, which is don't eat any of the seafood and sea life out of the Gulf of Mexico, because the oil spill is pretty well wrecked it. So we need to be going to alternative energy sources, and they're all over the place, but they are being kept from the public, again, by these large corporations who are totally based on petroleum.
What are some of those? Because I was going to touch on the fact that, you know, global food prices, of course, and this is all from Jim's book, by the way, folks. This is Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us. Jim Marrs, www.nightfrightshow.com. All his books will be there, folks. This is his latest one. You're going to want to get them all, because he is the chairman of the board, without question, of research authors. Now, I was going to touch upon something that I wasn't aware of in the book, and this might be a good segue to it. The price of food is in direct correlation to the price of corn, which is in direct correlation to the price of ethanol, which is corn makes up ethanol, which is a large proportion of our gas. So this is very scary to think that, again, we're coming full circle to the oil companies, and so getting off oil, I think, would be something down the road that might benefit us and lower some food prices.
Right. Well, the problem is that if we keep going to these ethanol fuels in an attempt to cut back on the amount of petroleum in the gasoline, then we're going to be using more and more of our food products to produce this energy. And then the next thing you know is, we may have a little cheaper fuel for our cars, but we're not going to have anything to eat. But that's the least of our problems when it comes to food crops. Number one, food. There are like 10 giant multinational corporations that control much of the food supply in the entire developed world. And some of them are familiar names like Nestle and Pepsi and Kellogg's and Coca-Cola, and others are not quite so known to us in America, like Mondelez or Associated British Foods, but it's just these 10 corporations. Now, that is actually kind of worrisome if you stop and think about it, because, again, to quote Henry Kissinger, he says, control oil, you control nations. Control food, you control the people. And this is unfortunately kind of where we're getting to. Going back to when I was a kid in the 40s and 50s, most of our food came directly from some local farm, or probably within the state. And it was only in the late 50s going into the 60s that they started coming out with supermarkets that were using processed food. And we'll talk about that for a half minute, because never mind about the poisons and the herbicides that they're using on our food supply right now. It's some of the stuff like high fructose corn syrup. That is concentrated sugar. And everyone knows, or should know, that sugar is really bad for you, And of course, but so instead of just saying sugar, they say high fructose corn syrup, which is a concentrated sugar. And this is why that today one of the biggest problems in the United States is obesity. Everybody's getting fat because of these processed foods that have all this ingredients in it, like high fructose corn syrup, MSG, bromide, things like this. Okay, which is deleterious on our health, but it tastes good. It tastes sugary and it tastes good, and so everybody wants it, and they just keep eating it. In fact, you could actually build up a dependency. Probably you can probably become habituated to certain foods, because of these chemicals and things they put in them. So, but the problem is, while they taste good, they are not nutritious. They are lacking in nutrients. And then worse than that, most of them today are being sprayed in their crops with Monsanto's Roundup herbicide, which is primary ingredient is glyphosate, and which has been even determined by the World Health Organization as promoting cancer and other illnesses. And that gets on the crops, it stays with them, we eat it, and that's not even getting into the whole controversy over genetically modified organisms that they are placing in the foods now. In fact, about 95% of all the soybeans that we use for products, 80% of U.S. corn contains GMOs, genetically modified organisms. And the problem there is that the only studies that have been allowed to be done have been done by the very companies that are providing these GMOs. And I think the truth is that it's such a recent phenomenon that we really don't know for sure what it's going to do to us in future generations. So there's just so many things to be concerned about, Brent.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. nightfrightshow.com.
Jim, could I just read this quote from your book? This is chapter 12, folks. It's called, the title of the chapter is GMOs, genetically modified organisms, and it's by Jane Goodall. And fans of this show will know that Jane's been on the show. And just as an aside, Jim, maybe you're not aware of this, but Jane was telling me that she's a firm believer that Bigfoot exists because so many Aboriginal people from around the world, from deep in the bush, have come to her and said they've spotted this creature that's hairy and furry, and it's not an ape, but it's the same description over and over and over again from various tribes from around the world, so it's not just isolated in one specific spot. But this quote from Jim's book, Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us, Jim Marrs, of course. Jane Goodall goes on to say about GMOs, Jane Goodall attacked the idea that genetically engineered foods are no different from natural crops and therefore safe. She noted, and this is a quote, how amazingly successful the biotech lobby has been. I'm going to talk about lobbyists in a second, folks. And at the extent to which the general public and government decision makers have been hoodwinked, this is her word, by the clever and methodical twisting of the facts and the propagation of many myths. Moreover, it appears that a number of respectful scientific institutions, as well as many eminent scientists, were complicit in this relentless spreading of disinformation. Let me tell you the book where this is from, folks. This is important stuff. Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us. Jim Marrs has put all this research together, and that's from Jane Goodall. So she is a United Nations messenger of peace. She's a friend of mine, and there's no one more ethical than Jane. So for her to write something like that, there's a serious problem, Jim, let's talk about how the lobbyists are negating the population and surpassing the voter and going right to the top.
Well, you can thank the Supreme Court for that. They recently ruled that corporations are like individuals, and they can just, they can give as much campaign contributions as they want to any particular political candidate, and that they don't necessarily have to have any restrictions or even report on who's doing that. And so all this is doing is this is codifying the situation that's been in this country now for a couple of decades, which is corporate fascism. Okay? Because, wait a minute, how can I say we're fascist? I can say it because of this. The dictionary definition of fascism is the combination of state and corporate power. Okay, in fact, Mussolini, who is credited with coining the term fascism because that comes from his black-shirted fascistas, and their symbol was an axe wrapped in the center of some sticks to represent central authority, the state. Okay, and even Mussolini said that fascism may not be the correct term, that a more correct term is corporatism, okay, ruled by the corporations. And I defy anybody to try to seriously argue with me that that's not what we have in the United States right now today. The corporations pretty well run what's going on, okay? In fact, it's quite ironic, but the original fascism in fascist Italy, World War II, and in fascist Germany under the Nazis, the state gained control over the corporations. And it was that blending of state and corporate power that is fascism. Now, here in modern America, it's just been reversed. The corporations have gained control over the state, okay? But it's the same thing. You still end up with fascism. Only and a socialism and a socialist state, except the money's not going to the poor people, the money's going to the wealthy corporations. And we saw this in action in 2008 when our whole economy tottered because of the predatory practices of these banks. And then instead of the banks getting in trouble, and instead of any banker being accused and prosecuted, because of criminal activity, we, the taxpayers, bailed them out, okay, because they were too big to fail. Now, that's not corporatism in action. I don't know what is.
One of the things I was reading about our food source, too, in your book as well, Jim, was all the junk that they put into the feed that they give cattle. And I was astonished.
I don't even know if you want to mention all that on the radio and make people throw up their dinner.
Oh, jeez. Well, I think it's important for them to know. Can you give us just a few examples of the garbage that goes into this stuff?
Oh, I'd have to go find. I'd have to go to that, but it's,
no worries. It's basically
it's feces. I mean, and it's bugs, and I mean, it's everything you can think of that's gross is probably what they're feeding them. And of course, then we know or should know about these cramped corporate food manufacturing corporations. This is not the friendly farm. These are cattle and sheep crammed together, pigs crammed together, chickens crammed together under one roof, not even able to move around, and their legs atrophy, and so it's really horrendous what goes on. And I'm not even a huge animal lover, but I'm pretty much disgusted when I read about the conditions in some of these mass food production facilities.
Just let me read this, Jim, and this is from CBC News, and this just took place a year or so ago, and many people in Canada will remember this. This is about XL Foods, and it's Canada's largest beef recall. The largest beef recall was ordered to address serious problems 6 times in 6 months. At least 18 people were made ill from meat traced to the plant, and a recall expanded to more than 1,500 products, while tons of beef from the plant had to be destroyed. Now, part of the problem was failure to sanitize cutting tools and workspaces. Inspectors were told to ignore contaminated carcasses, mixing of edible and inedible parts of carcasses, lapses in building maintenance that saw condensation from pipes and God knows what else dripping directly onto carcasses. And this is the food that we're ingesting. So Jim's book is bang on, folks. www.nightfrightshow, Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us. Jim Marrs, none better. Let's talk about water. I love this quote from your book, Jim. W.C. Fields said he would never drink water because fish fornicated in it. So, Jim, my question to you is, that's good enough for me not to drink water. Should we be drinking our water?
Well, under natural and normal circumstances, of course, water is critical for life, okay? But the problem is, number one, we're wasting it. California is now suffering from a severe drought and drought conditions, and to the point where they recently have instituted water rationing and are even creating now a system of penalties if they think you're misusing water. Okay, you could be like, if I know one thing they've done is some inspectors drive around. If your lawn is green, then you're watering your lawn, and you could be subject to a $500 fine. This has prompted some companies now that are getting paid to come and paint the dead grass green so that your lawn looks nice, but it's not real. But then when I was out in California during the early part of the summer, I was in Palm Springs, and I went to a golf course there, and it was just beautiful with the palm trees and the greens and the green fairways and the sprinklers going, all over the place. It was just beautiful, but I got thinking, wait a minute, here's this beautiful golf course that they have to keep green, and it's in the middle of the desert, And then I found out this was only one of 125 golf courses just in Palm Springs. This desert environment. Well, wait a minute. So you have 125 golf courses in the desert, and then you wonder why you're running out of water. I don't get it. To me, it's a pretty simple deal. But there's even worse things about the water. First off, if you live in the city, chances are you're drinking fluoridated water. Okay, and of course this has been a item of controversy since about after World War II, which is when they instigated this whole thing. I've got an ad I'm looking at here for Sweeney's sodium fluoride, okay, that was sold in the 1930s. And it's down at the bottom, it's got a big warning thing with skull and crossbones, and it says poison, insecticide, effective against cockroaches, water birds, lice, and poultry. I don't understand the poultry bit, but obviously it's not good for any living thing because it's a pesticide. It's poison. And now they're putting it in your water supply. Now, why? Well, because during World War II, in Germany, the Nazis found out that if you put just a little drop of sodium fluoride in the water and in the concentration camps, it would kind of numb down the inmates and keep them passive and non-resistant, okay? And so they put that in the water in the concentration camps. The Russians found out about that, and they did the same thing with the water in their gulag. Okay, and now over here in America, of course, they couldn't tell everybody we're going to dumb you down by putting this sodium fluoride in your water. No, so they went to the ADA, American Dental Association, and said, we've got a study here that shows that between the age of 6 and 12, if a kid would have just a little bitty touch of sodium fluoride in his toothpaste, then he would have less cavities. And they sold that, and so they started putting it in the toothpaste. And then they went to the cities and said, well, why don't we just put it in the water supply and everybody could have less cavities? Never mind, it was only for kids between 6 and 12, and even those studies are now in dispute. And so they started putting it in the whole water supply. Today, 70% of the municipal water supply in this country, they're putting sodium fluoride in there. And if you don't think that this is serious, just get your tube of toothpaste that says got fluoride in it and look on the back, and you're going to find a little warning that says keep out of the reach of children under 6. If accidentally swallowed, contact the Centers for Disease Control, Poison Center. Come on, folks. Why would anybody allow themselves to be putting a poison in their mouth? All right? And the key thing to me is maybe there's somebody who would want to buy fluoridated toothpaste and actually put that poison in their mouth, hoping that maybe, in addition to discoloring their teeth, it might, however, prevent a few cavities. And if you want to do that, fine. But think about this. This is involuntary medication. You've got undocumented, non-medical people, city workers that are pouring this stuff in your water supply, and medicating the entire city, and you don't have any choice in it, okay? And when you go to the city councils and you say, hey, why don't you stop doing this? Well, they trot out a few experts that come from the, the government, come from the ADA and say, oh, no, this is really good stuff. Oh, okay. And so they just keep doing it. But as long as we're mentioning experts, a lot of the things that we have and we'll be talking about, Brent, you can probably find a doctor or some other chemical expert or some corporate executive who's going to tell you, oh, no, this is all just conspiracy theory. Everything's fine. GMOs are wonderful. It's sodium fluoride's good for you, and I don't like that. But let me simply point out that just in my own lifetime, I remember when doctors were on TV telling me that smoking Camel cigarettes was good for me. So you can always find somebody who you can buy off and who will push for the latest fad and the latest corporate move. And so I would be very distrustful of all so-called experts. Okay, listen to them all, but don't believe any of them, including me.
Do your own research, I think, is always the best policy for everybody. There's a lot
Absolutely.
of chemicals, even in the Great Lakes, folks. And, I live in Kingston, Ontario, which is right on Lake Ontario. And that's exactly where the lake meets the St. Lawrence River. It's called 1,000 Islands. You're going to laugh, Jim, but just across the way, within 5-minute swimming distance from me right now, is a place called Watertown. And the Dulles brothers grew up there. So maybe there was something in the water even back then.
Well, maybe that explains something of that.
But I found this report, folks, and this is from gentle, wonderful Canada, okay, that boasts the most fresh water in the world. The following quotes from the St. Catharines Standard newspaper, the Ontario Ministry of Environment, in its guide to eating Ontario sport fish. The report concludes levels of people-harming toxins like mercury, PCBs, pesticides, dioxins, and furans in fish are alarmingly high and not falling. Lake Ontario was singled out for having many advisories for unsafe consumption, even for smaller fish, which are usually considered safe eating. That's from the Minister of the Environment, folks. That's terrifying in a lake that size. Now, I'm using this, Jim, as a segue into something that...
Well, wait,
Brett. Please go ahead.
To add insult to injury, I mean, if that's not bad enough, think about this. We have a growing problem with psychiatric drugs. More and more people are taking these drugs for antidepressant and for all kinds of weird things. Veterans for, post-traumatic stress syndrome, et cetera, and the growth of these psychotic drugs has just been, phenomenal. Now, what happens with these drugs? One thing that happens, and we can talk further about this, is that they, according to the industry's own publications, they induce suicidal and homicidal tendencies. Okay, so that, in other words, when you see these mass shootings, all the media can talk about is guns. It's not the guns, it's the drugs. And these drugs end up in the water supply because when they go to the bathroom, they eliminate them, or they spill them, or they throw them away, or, whatever. And there is an increasing number of medical waste that goes into our water supply. So there again, on top of everything else, now you have to worry about the lingering effects of these psychiatric drugs. And if that's not enough, now we have to worry about hydraulic fracturing.
Oh man!
Okay, yeah. which is commonly called fracking, which is where they take water with chemicals. Okay, some 40,000 different chemicals, including toxic substances such as lead, uranium, mercury, hydrochloric acid, formaldehyde, and they pump it down in a well deep underground at high pressure to open up cracks down in the strata underneath the earth so that they can more easily get hold of gas and oil and, increase oil production. But As I mentioned earlier, we don't even need the additional oil production because just that back in field up in the Midwest, up towards Canada, could provide enough petroleum for the rest of for several centuries. Okay, but so what are they doing the fracking for? Well, it's real simple because according to Andrew Laveris, who's CEO of Dow Chemical, he says water is the oil of the 21st century because, hey, you can actually get along for maybe a few days, maybe even a week without any food, but you can't get along more than a few days without water. And they are gaining control over the water supply, these corporate owners. T. Boone Pickens, the corporate raider from Texas, has been buying up property all up and down the middle of America there over the Olagala Aquifer, which provides the water for the America's breadbasket. And Warren Buffett, who everybody's heard about, he's heavily invested in water technology that produces treatments, filtering membranes. Some of these the top banks in the world are now buying up all of the water processing. In fact, there are now essentially three multinational corporations, Perrier, Coca-Cola, Nestle, that essentially are getting control over the bulk of the water supplies in the world. And by the way, I even found out that here, I remember a few years ago, I saw a news item that said that the Bush family had purchased almost 300,000 acres in Paraguay, okay? And so I thought, I wonder what's going on there. Maybe they're going to flee down there with the other Nazis, you know. And I say that advisedly because Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. and the father of George Herbert Walker Bush, was actually prosecuted in late 1942 by the federal government of the United States under Trading with the Enemies Act for being nothing but a financial frontman for Hitler and the Nazis. So, but then I found out, no, they've got this 300 acres in Paraguay, which just happens to sit atop the largest single body of groundwater in the world, the Guarani Aquifer. So, see, they're all buying it up, and they're trying to get control over the. So if they can get control over the food supply, get control over the water supply, then, you know, we've just had it. Because then they're going to say, do whatever we say, or you don't eat, you don't have any water.
That's a fact, and it's a great way to control population. If you can control their foodstuffs and their water at the same time, you control the population without question. You know, I went through the 1998 ice storm, biggest environmental catastrophe in Canadian history. I was in Montreal, a major urban center at the time. You've all seen the post-apocalyptic movies where the shelves are empty, there's nobody in the streets, there's only helicopters going over with searchlights. That's Montreal, 3.5 million people without water, without food, without electricity, in the middle of the winter, minus 20, minus 25.
Wow.
Yeah, it was only 2 weeks. I say that, you know, now in the middle of the summer.
Must have seemed like a lifetime to you.
Man, so I made myself a promise. Any nuclear holocaust, I'm at ground zero because I don't want to be around after. It's just horrible. Absolutely horrible.
You know, Brent, most people do not stop to think about how fragile our society is, and thank you for that example because that was just a natural thing. That just happened to be a cold snap in the middle of winter, okay?
Yeah.
Now, how about this? What if Obama comes on the television tomorrow and says, due to the current financial instability, we're going to declare a bank holiday for 3 days, okay? We're just, you know, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, all right? And then Monday, all the banks will open again, and everything will be okay. All right, well, as soon as he does that, what's going to happen? Everybody's going to run to the bank, try to draw out their money, and then they find out they can't, or they can only draw out a couple of $100 at the most. Then they're going to really panic, and so they're going to run to the grocery store and try to buy up everything they can so they can store it up. Other people see them doing that. They then buy up everything. The grocery store's shelves empty within a matter of hours, and as we all know, if the food truck doesn't come once a week, there's no food on the grocery shelves, and the whole thing could fall apart in a matter of hours. just over one little thing. It doesn't even have to be a disaster.
That's right. It's unbelievable, folks, because don't forget, you can't get gas, electricity. You can't
Use your
withdraw
ATM.
money. Exactly. So I was stuck with whatever cash I had lying around the house. I was going through penny jars to try and feed the family. And I'm not kidding. And you know what the Sons of Guns did in some stores? They put up the price of batteries. Yeah. So.
Oh, now that's gouging.
Yeah. And a lot of
That's
people
terrible.
got caught for that afterwards. But at the time, what are you going to do? I mean, your family's at home. You've got to feed your family.
Well, I'll tell you what you do is anyone listening to this right this minute, you better look around and figure out, can you get along if for a week, okay? Can you go along for a few days without cash, without food, without water, without any medicines, anything you need? If you say, no, I want all that, then you better stockpile it, okay? Get a little something ahead. And if like on food, if you rotate your canned goods or whatever and keep 4 or 5 cans of beans on hand instead of one, and then it's not going to go to waste because eventually you'll eat the one can, and then you'll eat the next, and then you replace them, and you'll keep a fresh supply. But number 2, you got 5 cans of beans, and so you can eat for at least 5 days. You know.
Exactly right. And you know, in Jim's book, folks, on page 335, and he's got a list that FEMA recommends accumulating the following basic supplies. And I'll put this list on the television aspects of the show, but I'll read it out right away really quickly. 1 gallon of water per person per day for drinking and sanitation. Food, at least 3 days supply of non-perishable food. The bean thing is a great idea, full of protein. Battery-powered radio and NOAA weather radio with tone alert. Extra batteries for both. Extra batteries, don't forget that. Flashlight with extra batteries, or one of those wind-up with things would be good too. Oh, whistle. Infant formula, don't forget those if you've got little ones around. Or diapers. Trust me on that one, diapers. Moist towelettes. Dust mask or cotton t-shirt to help filter the air. I mean, this book is just full of great things to do for a coming, perhaps, a collapse. The book is called, folks, Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us. The author's name and our guest tonight, Jim Marrs. Jim, I want to touch on somebody that passed away not too long ago that was a friend of mine, a friend of yours. I met him in Sudbury, Ontario, Professor Donald Scott. And you refer to him quite a bit in the book, and I was wondering if we could just say a few words about Donald and his research, especially when it came to chemtrails. You had touched on that earlier.
Right. Well, Donald Scott, of course, came up with the idea that the Gulf War syndrome may be the result of some biochemical warfare that's kind of gotten out of hand, and I think that he definitely was onto it. And unfortunately, though, it seems like these people who try to tell us what's really going on don't last very long. In fact, Brent, this brings up a kind of a breaking story right now. There is now about 8 doctors who have been working with an enzyme protein called G-small-c-MAF. And they have found that this is an enzyme that helps boost our immunization system. In fact, what it is let me see here.
No
I want to try to tell you what this
worries.
stuff is. Yeah, it's globulin component macrophage activating factor. Okay, it's a protein, and what they're finding out is that there is another substance called anagolese that they have found in vaccinations that neutralizes this GCMAF and is actually causing more diseases. And our bodies do not have a sufficient amount of this GCMAF, and that's why that cancer and diabetes and autism, all these things are increasing in number. And so the thing that's worrying me is there's always somebody who says, well, let's go natural, and we have holistic medicine, and try my pills. But in this case, there's 8 doctors that have been working with saying this could be the cure for everything, and they've all died within the past few weeks.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So when they start killing people off, then I pay attention because it sounds like this must be something real. And I think we need to look on this. So everybody make a note of this. It's G with a little c, MAF, globulin component macrophage activating factor. Just GCMAF. Google that up and look at it and study it and get your doctor to consider it, because this really it makes sense to me. If we could get our immunization systems up to their normal operating capacity, then we shouldn't get sick. You know, people are so concerned about getting cancer. Well, let me tell you something, and any doctor will tell you the same thing. You've got cancer cells in your body right now. Everybody's got cancer cells. But if your immunization system is up to par, you should be able to handle that. They don't spread, they don't multiply, and your body can resist them, okay? What happens to people when they get cancer is that their immunization system has become deficient, and it cannot stop the spread of the cancers, all right? And in fact, it's even so simple that even back in the 1930s, there was a Dr. Warburg who pointed out that cancers can only live in an acidic environment. And acidic means when you've got a lot of sugar in you, you know. And of course, even breads and things like that turn to sugar in your body. So, you know, if you're eating a lot of potatoes, a lot of starches, a lot of breads, then you're going to have a very acidic system, and you're going to be prone to cancer. But if you keep your system alkaline, he found that cancer cells cannot grow. In fact, they cannot thrive in an alkaline system. So if you will stop eating all the bread and the sugars and all the stuff that's got sugar in it, then your chances of contracting cancer go way down.
Jim, we're going to have to start to wrap up now, but I want to sincerely thank you, as always, for coming on the show and giving us the best darn books around, without question. Tonight, folks, we've been speaking about his latest book, one I urge you all to get. It's called Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us. Jim Marrs, www.nightfrightshow.com, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest book covers. There will be a bunch of them there. I encourage you to get them all. And knowledge is power. Don't forget that. Jim, thank you so much for coming on the show, my friend.
Thank you, Brent. We'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
All right. And just remember, always question authority.
Without question. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. There's the music. Take care, everybody. See you next time.
Listening to Night Fright and your host, Brent Holland. The time is now. Your voice on the dark for paranormal and conspiracy.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now, nightfrightshow.com.